Hi, my name is Elaine Pendergrass. I love to work with children and parents, helping parents to be equipped to raise their children in faith. I work as a children's pastor, I'm a ministry consultant, and I also have my own children, as well as my background in education and school administration. I've worked with kids for a lot of years, and I heard a lot of parents say things like, I don't know what to do with my child. How do I help teach him how to pray? How do I know what Bible to choose? How do I do this at home? And oftentimes, parents depend on the church to raise their children. That's awesome. We love to do it, and it's our honor to raise your children in faith. We don't really raise them, but to teach them about faith concepts and about Jesus. And yet we only have them for an hour a week, and they live with you. So what a great opportunity for you to be able to do things at home between faith and family. I also am realistic, and I know that it's tricky for families to find time that they can sit down and do a family devotion. Certainly not every night, but even to find a time during the week. And so what I like to teach parents to do is to take the moments that occur naturally and to build faith concepts and talk about Jesus and talk about what it means to be a Christian into the things that happen in everyday life. In Deuteronomy 6, it talks about how the father of the house, and back in Jewish times that was really important when Jesus lived, and before him even, that the father helped guide the children in how to follow God. And we still do that today in our homes, but we also include a mom in this. Sometimes there's not a father in the home. Sometimes there's just a mom, whatever that looks like. It is the responsibility of the parents to teach their children about God. And so in Deuteronomy 6, it talks about talking about principles about what it means to follow God at the time, Jewish principles. But it talks about following and talking about this when you rise, when you wake up, when you walk by the way, when you lie down. So basically taking everyday things and talking about faith during those things. So we want to be able to do that in our lives today in the world that we live in. So how do we do that? One thing that we can do is remember that we're learning from each other. There are times that things will happen between your child and you, or you'll see something happen in everyday life, and it's a great talking point. When I was in college, I was a babysitter, and I babysat for this one little girl, super sweet little girl, and she was about 4. I was going through a really difficult time in my life, and I was sitting with her coloring. We had crayons and pens and all of the things, and she was learning to write. So she knew how to write her name, but I didn't know what other words she knew to write. And she wrote something down, and she said, "Do it like me, Miss Elaine, do it like me." And what she wrote was the word faith in all capital letters, and I still have the note to this day. It was so meaningful to me, and it reminded me that when Jesus called the children to him, he said, you have to have faith like a child to come into the kingdom. And so it reminded me to have total dependence and reliance on God. I learned that from a 4-year-old. And so that can certainly happen in your family as well. So let's talk about how do we know what children are into, and how do we know how to teach our children? Well, it's important to think about, first of all, the generation that we're working with. So this generation between 2010 and 2025, children born in that time are called the Alpha generation. They're also called the glass generation because of media and things that they're holding that have glass, like phones. And so this generation has lots of information at its fingertips. You, like I, have probably seen lots of kids that can navigate the internet easily. They can find what they want on YouTube. They can Google things quickly, and they know how to find information. They're saturated with information. Back in my day, when I was a kid, we got a World Book Encyclopedia series, and that was a big deal. So if you wanted to know something about space, for example, you go find the S and you look up space, or whatever the term was, and what letter that fit with. But today, when children are wondering about things, they just Google that. That might be great. They can also ask Siri, they can ask Alexa, they can ask Google, but at the same time, they can get into things they don't need to necessarily get into. But knowing that they're saturated with information is really important. Another thing about this generation is that they're constantly stimulated. I've seen so many young children that hold their parents' phones and they look at videos and they switch to a new video and they watch it for a minute and they switch to a new video. There's not the idea of keeping a constant stream of watching. In fact, it's like I can constantly change what I'm into. So their attention spans are shorter, but also they're used to being entertained. So imagine if you sit down with a Bible at the dinner table and plan on having a 30-minute devotion with your children, it's probably not going to be super successful because they're used to being entertained. So that's another aspect that's important. And as I mentioned already, that attention span is short. So keep that in mind as you work with your own children. It's also important to note what age group your children are in. So if you were like me, you've probably read and seen when you were expecting children what children should be doing at certain developmental levels. So their infancy from 0 to age 11 months, the toddler age 1 to 2, the preschool age about 3 to 4, and then you've got your early elementary kids, kindergarten to 2nd or so, and then your older elementary kids, 3rd to 5th or so. And they all learn in different ways. Some things they have very much in common because they're part of the same generation. Other things are very different. So young babies are exploring with their mouths and they're touching and they're feeling. As they get a little bit older, toddlers are expressing themselves. They're testing boundaries. They're still learning and soaking up a lot of information, but they're beginning to be verbal. They're beginning to say words. They're beginning to use their gross motor skills and walking and talking. And talking is another part, and crawling and all the different things. As they get a little bit older, they're learning more. They're starting to do parallel play, playing beside people. And as they get a little older, they're beginning to recognize that letters mean something. They're not just weird symbols, but that they have meaning. Then they eventually learn to read, and here we go. So it's important to think about the things you're doing with your children, that you're on the right age level with them. You can find out partly because you can see if they seem interested in it. If not, if it seems too baby for them, they'll probably become disinterested. And if they seem like they can't focus, it's probably a little advanced for them. So just pay attention to what developmental level your children are at, because that will help you to guide your discussions and your activities that you do with them. Let's talk about teachable moments. So these are moments that teachers talk about when we can take an opportunity that's already happening, whether it's reading a book, whether it's something that happens that your children are telling you about or you experience together, it's a movie, it's some sort of an opportunity that you could interject some information to help train them. And so in the classroom, one example I've had is one time I was teaching a 1st grade class, sitting in a rocking chair. The kids were at my feet on the floor listening to a story, and some kids started to jump and they all started to get up and move, and there was a little snake on the floor. The school had been through new construction, and so we jumped up quickly and ran out the room. But that gave an opportunity when we came back in the room when things were calm to talk about snakes and to talk about reptiles and to talk about what we do when we're scared and all the different things. Those are called teachable moments. So when you have someone, for example, that's sick in the hospital, that's a great opportunity to talk about how Jesus healed people in the Bible. It's a great opportunity to talk about how we can pray for Jesus to heal them, for God the Father to heal them. It's also a time to talk about not every time someone got healed. Sometimes our prayers aren't answered the way we want, but God knows best. So taking whatever those moments are that come up and using them to teach your children can be really effective. Thinking about this piece is making connections as well. So I used to know someone that said, I need something to hang my hat on. And the idea behind that was, if you know something about it, you're able to make a connection with what you already know. And that's how our brains really develop. So we have something and then our brain connects to this because it learned something new, and it connects to this and it connects to this. And as things connect, we begin to understand more. So an example might be if someone said they wanted to talk about astrophysics, I would be like, nope, I don't know anything about that. I might be able to make a little connection though, because I've heard the word astro, and I've heard that an astronomer looks at stars and planets, and I've heard that an astronaut goes to space. So it probably has something to do with space. So I have a little bit of knowledge. So knowing what your children have knowledge of and what their experiences are like can be great as you help them to make connections. Building on what your children already know can be really strong to help their brains grow and to help them grow in their faith as well. So let's talk about some ways to try this. Every family I know has some sort of time with water each day. So it might be bath time. If you have young children, they likely take a bath each day or a shower. But in bath time, I found it to be a great time that kids like to play. So you might have toys in the water like boats or animals or people or whatever. And that's a great time to bring up stories in the Bible that have to do with water. So think about it like this. Jesus walked on water, and he called Peter to walk to him. There was a great storm, and Jesus calmed the storm when he was on the water. There's stories about fishing on the water, being fishers of men, and stories about great catches of fish. There are Old Testament stories as well. And so anytime your children are taking a bath, this might be a great time to share those stories with them or to remind them of the stories, have them act out the stories using the toys in the water. Another thing would be if you go to the beach or if you go to a lake. This is also a great time to talk about this. And a storm, whenever a storm comes up, maybe in the summer when you have a thunderstorm and your children might be afraid, it's a great time to talk about the time that Jesus was on the boat with his disciples and they were scared because there was a great storm. They went to find him and he was sleeping. That's how comfortable he felt, knowing it was going to be okay. But that we can go to Jesus just like the disciples did. And when they did, Jesus calmed the storm. He said, "Peace, be still." Now, when we go through a storm in real life, it's important to ask God to help us, to not be afraid. He might not stop the storm. The storm might still happen, but we can know that Jesus is always with us and we can call out to him for help. So using those moments that really happen are the kinds of things you can do to make connections. Another example of this is talking about Christmas, one of my favorite holidays, if not my very favorite holiday. But we can make connections with children through Christmas because every child has a birthday. And when we celebrate birthdays, we do certain things like decorate, invite people to parties, we have parties, we give gifts, we eat cake, we sing happy birthday, all of those things. And so when Christmas time comes around, when we begin to celebrate Advent, which is the season before Christmas, we're expecting the coming of Jesus and we're excited about it. Very much like a birthday party. Children get excited. They think about the gifts they want. They think of who to invite to the party. They have a party. A lot of things that a lot of children do. And so when it's time to talk about Christmas, make sure you focus on the birthday boy, who is Jesus. In our family, we even have a birthday cake on Christmas Day, and we blow out the candles and sing happy birthday to Jesus. Children get that connection. They have a birthday and Jesus had a birthday. So put the emphasis where it belongs. Another example is the story of Mary and Martha in the New Testament. When Jesus is visiting Mary and Martha's home, Mary sits at the feet of Jesus and listens to him. But Martha is busy. She's getting the house ready like many people would, and that was really probably her role. So she's preparing the house and cleaning and cooking and all of the things. And Martha becomes frustrated because Mary is just sitting there not helping. I don't know if your children have ever thought about things like this. Mine have. And Jesus says to Martha that Mary has chosen the better thing, that she's sitting at his feet and listening. So it's not an apples to apples comparison, but when things come up that relate, you can talk about this. So when it's time for your kids to do the chores, or when they've done their chores, or those kinds of things, you can talk about this story. When you see a mop or a broom or a rag or a duster, you can talk about this story. When your children are so busy doing other things that they have difficulty stopping to listen to Jesus, you can use this story. So that's another great example. So making connections is important. Another thing that we can do with our children is theological reflection. This is the idea that we think about how God relates to what we're watching or reading or seeing. And so this is something that I learned to do a lot through movies. My husband and I, when we were first married, and even now, love to watch movies together. And he's really good at this because he's a PhD in historical theology. And so he naturally thinks about spiritual things really easily. So we'll see movies, and oftentimes after the movie, we'll talk about how something reminded us of something in the Bible, or something reminded us of Jesus, or something reminded us of evil or of God or of whatever those things are. That is theological reflection. How do we see God at work in other things? So the other day I was watching a friend of our family. I was watching his son, and we were playing Legos, and I turned on a show for him, and it was Mickey Mouse Clubhouse, which my kids watched when they were little. And the episode was about Daisy Duck. And Daisy Duck was a little upset because she was helping Little Bo Peep, who lost one of her sheep. And so Little Bo Peep was upset, and Daisy Duck was trying to help her. So she asked her friends to come alongside and help to find this lost sheep. So at one point I stopped and I said to the little boy, "Hey, that reminds me of a story in the Bible. Do you remember that story about the lost sheep?" And I knew he had because we had done it at church recently. But that story is the story about the shepherd, and Jesus tells this story. It's about a shepherd who had 100 sheep, and all of the 99 were there, but one was lost. And so he left the other sheep and went to find the one sheep. And when he found that sheep, there was like a party. There was a great celebration. He was super excited. And the point of that is that God is so excited for us when one of us comes to know who he is and comes to follow him. And there's a party in heaven by the angels for those that come to follow Jesus. So that's a great connection, because a lost sheep and then a lost sheep, and then we can talk about the story as well. You could get out the picture Bible and tell that story. You could get out a regular Bible and just tell it to your children, or even read it to them. Another example, one of my favorite movies at Christmas, is How the Grinch Stole Christmas. the old one or the new one. But nevertheless, that story has nothing to do with Jesus. It has nothing to do with why we really celebrate Christmas, but I still like it. And there's some parts that can be, and there's some parts that we can relate to what it means. There's one part in particular that we can talk about with our children. It's the part where when the Grinch's heart has grown and he says something like, the Grinch thought maybe Christmas doesn't come from a store. Maybe Christmas perhaps means a little bit more. I would take that opportunity with my children, whether I was reading the book or watching the movie, to say Christmas is more about than things that come from stores. It's not about presents. It's not about bows. There's this whole line in the movie about that, a set of lines. And what is it really about? It's about Jesus. Jesus' birthday. That's why we celebrate Christmas. So using those moments when real things happen in real life or in a movie or in a story to talk about what's the connection that can be made to something we know in the Bible, something Jesus taught to do or not to do, or something that we've learned that Christians should or shouldn't do. Another example of how we as Christian parents can help our children grow in faith and build that faith and family connection is to think about the worldview, the Christian worldview, as opposed to the worldview that we're given oftentimes. If you have children that are in school already, if they're in public school, or if you even watch the news, you've seen things that are being introduced to children. They're talking about, in schools, they're talking about sexuality. Now there are teachers sharing what sexuality they align with, what gender they align with, if it's different than what their given birth gender was, and those sorts of things. And to a Christian parent who's following the New Testament and what Jesus taught and what the New Testament teaches about sexuality, that is very, very different than what the world teaches. So a Christian worldview is quite different from what the world teaches. And so if our children are going to be exposed to these things and taught that these things are okay, that you can do sexual things with whoever you want to, whenever you want to, I would say to you as a Christian parent and as a follower of Jesus, that's not what the Bible teaches. The New Testament says that we should only do sexual things with our spouse of a different gender. And so Jesus said that a man and woman will be united and become one, basically. And sexual immorality is any kind of sexual activity outside of a marriage between a man and a woman. So when the world is teaching us you can do whatever you want with whoever you want, whenever you want, Jesus would say, mm-mm. Paul would say, mm-mm. The New Testament would say, mm-mm. And so we need to think about that. So we have to have opportunities to tell our children what the Bible says. So they're not just hearing it from school where they're 7 hours a day, but they're hearing it from us at home. This is not just about sexuality. This is about choices that we make, what we put in our bodies. It's about the words that come out of our mouth. It's about the behavior we exhibit. It's about what we watch on the internet and what we watch in shows and things like that. And it's not all about no, no, no. It's also about what would Jesus say to do. So one example is when I was a school administrator, I've had parents say to me and grandparents say to me, when their children got in a fight, they would come in for the meeting and the parent would say, well, I told Johnny when somebody hits him, he should hit him back. And I'm kind of shocked as an administrator, but also as a Christian parent, because I'm thinking, my children are not taught that. My children are taught if somebody hits you, you don't hit them back. That's not what Jesus taught. Jesus said, turn the other cheek. And whether he meant physically turn the other cheek or walk away or don't respond, that's what we're teaching them to do. And so when someone says that and it's not with a Christian worldview, I'm going to teach my children the Christian worldview, and I hope that you will too. Worldview matters because we're shaping what our children think is right and think is wrong. What I grew up learning as right and wrong is very different than what's being taught to children as right and wrong today. You can even look back just a few years ago at movies that were popular and see how the worldview has shifted, how certain things that were said or done in movies a few years ago would not be politically correct today. And some of that is moving away from a Christian worldview. So we want to be aware as parents of what our children are watching, what they're ingesting, what they're listening to, so that we can make corrections for them and guide them in the right way. Some parents choose to do this by saying, I'm not going to expose my children to this. They're going to be homeschooled. They're not going to have access to media. I'm going to control what shows they watch and don't watch. We're only going to watch G-rated movies and things like that. Some parents choose to do that. I have seen children, unfortunately, though, that were raised in homes like that end up rebelling because they don't know how to solve the problems. They don't know how to dive into making difficult decisions because they were so sheltered from having to make those decisions. So in our family, we've decided to introduce our children to things, to let things happen around them with carefulness, being careful, because we want to be age appropriate and things like that, of course. And at the same time, we want to be able to guide them when things come up that aren't appropriate for Christians, or things that are appropriate for Christians that aren't being done. And so our children have gone to public school for some of their life, and other times private school when I was head of school. And we've talked about when they come home from school and are learning, different things about sexuality, and different things about words they can use, and different things about how people are treated, and on it goes. What kinds of things people are ingesting or talking about buying. We talk about those things and what does God want us to do about this? What would be the right decision to make? Should we be involved in this? How should we react? And that way, as they get older, our children hopefully are ready to go into the real world and make wise decisions. So that's part of the Christian worldview piece, is taking those moments and going, we're going to shift those around. One way we've done this, a simple example, is that I like to watch Christmas movies. And so a lot of Hallmark movies, a lot of other movies that are on TV and things like that. And in almost every Christmas movie I've ever seen, there is some moment where someone says Christmas is all about, and fill in the blank. It could be family, it could be love, it could be giving gifts, whatever it is. When my children were little, when that line would be said, I would say, no, it's not. Christmas is about Jesus. It's Jesus's birthday. As they got a little bit older, they might be playing on the floor and doing stuff, but I just wanted to be aware of what they were hearing. And they would then say, when that moment came up, let's say that the phrase was, Christmas is all about family. And my children would hear that, and I would say, no, it's not. What's it about? And they would say, it's Jesus's birthday. As they got a little bit older, it surprised me one day when that line came up. Christmas is all about family. And my children said, no, it's not. It's about Jesus's birthday. And I was like, oh, we've done something right. It doesn't always happen, but in those moments when you're like, oh, they got it. That's so powerful. So those moments, if you're watching something on TV and a commercial comes up that's not something that you agree with, there's even commercials now I've heard that have cuss words or hints at cuss words, and I'll say, we don't say that. It's not that you're sheltering them from it, but instead you're saying, other people do this, but we follow Jesus, so we don't do this. Of course, with failure, we're all going to fail. Parents, we're going to fail. There are going to be times we're driving down the road and somebody cuts us off and we say something that we shouldn't say. Those are also moments that you can teach your children to say, oh, I shouldn't have said that. That wasn't a good thing to do. I'm so grateful that God forgives me when I make mistakes and when I sin. So use those moments to help shape your children's Christian worldview so that they're able to make wise decisions as they grow in faith. One big final thing is that repetition is good. Let me say that again. Repetition is good. And one more time, repetition is good. It is helpful for kids and for adults to do things over and over. So think about when you first learned to tie your shoes. You probably didn't learn it your very first time. Somebody taught you the bunny ear and the flip and all the different things more than one time. When we learn new skills, we need to do them more than one time. And it's the same thing with Christian living. So when the Christmas movie thing comes up, that would be every Christmas movie every year, right? And so we repeat it. And yeah, you can get tired of saying it sometimes, but man, how fruitful and exciting is it when your children begin to adopt the right things to say, when they begin to give up the things they shouldn't say, when they begin to follow Jesus and they begin to act like Jesus would want them to act, because you've helped instill these values in them. So powerful. So where can you go for help? Let me give you some resources to check out. One is the Bible app for kids. This is one of the apps I'm aware of, and there's actually a Bible that goes along with it that you can use with your children. So if your children are going to watch something, give them something productive to watch. I'm still a fan of Old Veggie Tales too. I think great principles, and they are there, available for you on YouTube. Another great resource is called the Bible Story Handbook. It is written by Dr. Walton and his wife, and he is a professor at Wheaton College and also an Old Testament scholar. This is a book that has over 100, maybe even 200 stories from the Bible, both the New Testament and the Old Testament. It's about a page or 2 or 3 pages probably per story, but it describes what the story is about. It gives the historical context. It tells what the focus should be of the lesson. It tells what mistakes to avoid in the lesson. So a classic example of this might be and I use this when I'm writing lessons for children's ministry. If I was going to teach my children, for example, about Noah's Ark, If you read it in a story Bible, it's more about, oh, that's so cute. The animals come 2 by 2 and God saves them and everybody's great and it's lovely and a rainbow. Never again. But really, the real story is about when God destroyed the world besides Noah's family because they were so evil. So it's really kind of dark and deep. So to help me with that, if I was going to teach that story, I would look up the Noah's Ark story, what it says about it, and I would read it from the Bible, but I would also read in the Bible story handbook what mistakes I should avoid, what things I should focus on. I also want to keep in mind what's age appropriate. Am I going to talk about evil and God destroying the world with a 2-year-old? But I also want you to keep in mind this can be a great tool because I have experienced for myself things that I was taught as a child or even as an adult that were incorrect. So when I've grown in my faith and I begin to read my own Bible, there are times I've read it and I thought, that's not what it says. I was taught this, but it really says this. And that's been very frustrating to me. And so I have really kind of a passion and a heart for teaching children correctly the right way the first time. And so when I write lessons, I'm studying what's happening around it, whether it's looking at a commentary, using a Bible story handbook, things like that. I don't know everything about the Bible. I know some things, but I can learn from other people who've studied it, and this is a great resource to use. Another resource is What is God Like? It's a series of picture books by William Lane Craig, and they talk about what is God like in kid terms, but understand big concepts in kid terms so kids can understand different things. So check that out. Another resource that I like is called Foundation Worldview. There's a podcast, there's a website, there's even curriculum. And the goal of this is, as I mentioned earlier, to help your children make wise decisions, to be able to critically think about what does this experience have to do with the Bible? How does it relate? If I'm a Christian, do I do this or do I not? Helping them to make wise decisions. It guides parents as well. For example, in the podcast, I listened to one today that talked about a certain story Bible and whether or not it was good or not. What were the benefits of it? What were the things against it? About things that are happening in society, things that our kids are being exposed to, and how we should deal with that as parents. So it's really a great resource. Of course, I don't agree with everything that everyone says, but there's some great things in it. And then I also have a website of my own called ElainePendergrass.com. It's teaching kids about God. On this, you can find blogs, you can find videos, you can find resources, you can find secular books like picture books that I recommend to teach Christian principles, Bibles I recommend, and things like that. If I can be of any help to you, please ask. If there are certain topics that you would like to know, how do I talk about this with my kid? Please drop that in the comments. Please like this video and share it with your friends and your family members so that we can all together work to raise our children to have a healthy faith in the family and to teach our kids how to be like Jesus. Have a great day.